We're going to start with a curveball, right? It's like, it's like we're the Yankees. We're not coming out here and throwing one straight down the middle off the first pitch, Matt. So the question is, we moved our gym and I can't find someone to sublease our old location.
Mhm.
What's the best way to break my old lease? Or should they even break that lease? What do you think?
Yeah, yeah, that's a tough one, and surprisingly, it is one that we get quite often. And I think for those who are new gym owners and they're getting ready to sign a lease, I mean, the first thing to understand is, a lease is a binding legal document, and states typically do not provide as much protection for commercial leases, to business owners than they do for just residential leases, or just like you who rent your apartment or your townhouse or whatever it is. So, you're coming into this as a business owner and you're sort of kind of expected to be a little bit more savvy about things, and you're going to get locked in a little bit more. So understand that when you go into a commercial lease, they are very, very difficult to break. And if you're going to try to go and get out of your lease, you're looking at one of about 3 or 4 different scenarios that have to play out if you have any chance at all at breaking your lease. And this is a common one that comes up because let me just, I will get to the answer, but let's assume you sign this commercial lease and you sign it for like 5 or 7 years. And I don't know how, if your gym has ever moved, but my gym didn't stick in its original spot for 5 years. We moved about 2 to 3 years in. And so you have to, that's something else to consider. But then you're looking to move, and can you get out of this commercial lease? The easiest way to quote unquote break a lease is if your commercial lease has an ability to exit. Um, it is very rare that a commercial lease, especially if you're dealing with like a leasing company, or a property holdings company that holds all of these commercial properties, and all they want to do is just collect rent, collect rent, collect rent. They're not going to come with exit clauses in the lease. If the building is owned in the leases through like an individual, then they can tend to be a little bit more flexible. But that's sort of like number one. That's like the easiest way. We look at the lease, we see there's an exit clause, boom, you're out of the lease. Okay. The second way is to look for any violations of the lease. Okay, there's an instance that would come to mind really quickly would be something like mold abatement. Okay, there's mold that grows in the commercial property. Obviously the landlord would be in charge of taking care of this, most likely, and the tenant puts the landlord on notice of this mold issue. The landlord doesn't do anything about it. Tenant has to move to a new location and wants to break the old lease, and the gym owner could then go and claim, look, we couldn't stay in our location because there was a mold issue that we told you about and you didn't take care of, so you need to let us break the lease. Okay, a little bit harder, but sort of like threats in order to break the lease. The third way is, in your scenario, Coop, you didn't quite give me the opportunity to have this option, but I'll take it anyway. That would be, you go to the landlord and you say to the landlord, we're going to move, please try to relet my property to somebody else. And if you're successful, let me out of my lease before the end date. Okay. And that's, perhaps that's not the easiest way, but perhaps the most popular way of quote unquote breaking a lease or getting out of a lease. And then, the final way is, which is what we always recommend, is you just have to call your landlord and say, I don't need the location anymore. I'm not going to be there. Let me out of my lease. And if the landlord will agree, then you can get out of your lease, no problems. Or they might say something like, you pay me, you still owe me for 8 months, so pay me for 4 months of it, and I'll let you out of it, or something like that. In which case, we just need a lease termination agreement.
All right. Speaking from a landlord's perspective, and I only do commercial leases. I guess I've got one guy living in an apartment.
Mhm.
Um, in general, the best way to approach this is to have a straight up conversation with the landlord. Like, I'm
Mhm.
moving, or I just can't use the space anymore, or I'm closing.
Mhm.
And, as long as they're a human, especially if they're local, they're going to give you some kind of middle ground. You're not just going to walk away. No way.
Right. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
they're probably going to negotiate something with you, like pay them 3 months so they've got the time to find a new tenant. But the key is, like, you don't go to them and say, I'm leaving, here's what I propose. You go to them and say, I'm leaving. Are you interested? Or are you open to having a conversation about this?
Mhm.
Start with that. So,
Yeah. 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 And that's super helpful if you are closing,
yeah.
um, because what's the concern here is basically you walk out of the space, you don't pay your rent, and then the landlord sues you. And if you filed, or if you had to sign a personal guarantee on top of the
Yeah.
lease, now you and your personal assets are now exposed, and you really don't want that to happen.
Yeah.
But if the gym is just closing, that's a good opportunity for you to go to the landlord and say, you can sue me, but there's no money.
Yeah.
Or we can sort of work this out and I'll pay you a little bit. And so you can continue to make a little bit of money, but then we can all walk away, shake hands and be happy.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Matt.